So when I think of the most controversial games of the last decade, there is one game that tops the list without a doubt, and that is The Last of Us Part 2. Hermione here even agrees the game is really good, but highly controversial. And while some people love it and think it's one of the best games ever made, others think that it is extremely underwhelming, that the story is stupid, that it's overly dark, pessimistic. Some people even assert that the gameplay isn't anywhere near as good as the critics made it out to be, blah, blah, blah. If you've heard it and can think of it, it's probably been said of this game. Now, fun fact, I actually got Hermione as a cat just around like a week and a half into the release of The Last of Us Part 2. She was just a little baby kitten, only a few weeks old at that time. So she is just about as old as the game is at this point. So I figured it was only appropriate for her to come in and play the game with us to see if it still is, or ever was, as good as the critics made it out to be. Because after all, the only real way to evaluate a game fairly is to play it, right? So let's do it. So first things first, and what's important to understand is I'm playing this on the PlayStation 5, so this is running at 60 frames per second, 4K. It looks tremendous. The original game launched at 30 FPS, still very usable, but definitely not as good as this. Forgive me, a cat is walking in front of the screen. I'm not joking. Mr. Finley, come here. Come here, say hi. Okay, can you say hi? Sorry, he's a big fella. He's a big boy. Big boy, say hi, Finley. Look at my shirt after that, like covered in white hair. Oh God. That's what I get for wearing black when I own a white cat. Now, I think the overwhelming majority of players will agree that the game still, to this day, 2 years later, looks tremendous. Animation quality, top notch. The voice acting, incredible. Very few elements of this game's design have holes in it. In general, it's incredibly well put together. Without a doubt, the one common thread in almost every critique of this game is that people don't like what they did with Joel and Abby. Specifically, that they killed off one of the fan favorite characters of all PlayStation history and then forced you to play as his murderer for the majority of the game. And then they constantly tease you with flashbacks like this, where you see Joel. It's like kind of haunting and torturous. But even these sections, as emotionally difficult as they may be, are still tremendously well put together, and they remind you just why we fell in love with Ellie and Joel as characters in the first place. Now listen, I get it. It's not particularly fun to play as the murderer of one of your favorite characters of all time. I understand that, but there was a very intentional artistic choice behind it. It wasn't like it was just done for shits and giggles. Because you see, the general premise behind The Last of Us Part 2 is that it's a game about seeking revenge and how utterly unfulfilling that pursuit really is. Ellie is seeking revenge for Joel, Abby is seeking revenge for her father, and the countless dozens of people that Joel murdered in his pursuit to save Ellie. And so it's a story that is uncomfortable to tell and to experience, but it's still, I just got jump scared while playing this, good God. It's a story that's tough to play sometimes, but it's still important to experience, I think. But that isn't the end all be all. I think there's some important caveats. So I have this friend named Corey. Hi, Corey, if you happen to see this. If he does comment, I will pin it so everybody knows. Corey is a good friend of mine. I love him dearly. He does not like sad, depressing stories. He just doesn't like it. He hates La La Land. He hates Titanic. He hates any of those stories, which are just generally depressing, because he's like, I'm here to watch a movie. I'm not here to just get depressed for the sake of being depressed, you know? And so The Last of Us Part 2 is just totally not his type of game. Everything about this game is just a bummer. Like, just when you think it's gotten lame enough, they take it up a notch and something horrible happens once again. Just when you think you've reached its peak. And it just happens time and time and time again. Oh, there's Helga. Hey, Helga. For the record, I don't know if her name is actually Helga. I just think she looks like a Helga, so I've called her a Helga for a long time. Yeah, mash the button. And then she Mike Tyson's her ear right off. Oh, God. Oh, it's good. And then Whack. Whack. She's gonna get whacked. Nope. Boom. That's why you wear a helmet, kids. Can you imagine if, like, for the majority of the game, Abby's just running around wearing a helmet? Like, they just never address it. That would be amazing. But you see, the broader design goal of The Last of Us Part 2 was very simple. They just wanted to take somebody who you hate intensely and then change your perspective into theirs and make you sympathize with them and question whether or not they're actually the bad guy. Maybe the person you've been rooting for this whole time is actually the bad guy and you just didn't realize it. And it's one of the coolest narrative flips that I've seen in any game that I can think of, like, ever. Any other fantastic narrative game that we could point to are very well put together. Sure, they have compelling characters, but I can't think of another game that has done what The Last of Us Part 2 tried to do. Now, it didn't work for everybody. A lot of people played through The Last of Us Part 2 and didn't find themselves enjoying Abby's company by the end of it. They still hated her guts for killing Joel. But a good number of people played through the game and realized, oh, like, you know, I love Joel, but he did, like, murder a lot of people. And he did it all to save one person who didn't even want to be saved. And I think this is why the game is so utterly polarizing, because the people for whom that plot worked, they found it extremely compelling. They thought it was one of the best games ever made. They gave it Game of the Year and really, really found it to be an amazing, unique experience. But for the players who didn't have that experience, who didn't find Abby sympathetic, who didn't reevaluate their position or find the refocusing of perspective to be effective, they just thought it was a depressing story that killed off one of their favorite characters and then forced them to hang out with the murderer for an extended period of time. Like, of course, they didn't have a good time with it. And then they make you kill doggies because, of course, they do. You know, like, of course. Sorry, I know you're just doing your job. Really sorry. But to be honest, it's not really as simple as just either this plot point worked for you or it didn't. It's a little more complicated than that, because I did a survey of players who, at least in theory, had played through The Last of Us Part 2, because I wanted to find out what the average gamer thought of the game. Without any sort of frill or fuss, I just wanted to get raw data on it. So I asked a bunch of you to respond to a Google survey I had done. And I'm dead again. God damn it. It's tough to talk while doing this, okay? Give me, like, a break. Come on. But what blew me away was just how many respondents to that survey faked their responses, who said that they had played the game when in reality, and in fact, they hadn't played the game at all. Because I actually put into that survey questions that somebody who had played the game would know, and that somebody who hadn't actually played the game but had maybe just watched a quick playthrough or watched a couple of raging videos from the quartering or something, they would have known that, but nothing too detailed. And so I was able to filter out those who had actually played the game and paid attention to the story and those who hadn't. And I was blown away that hundreds upon hundreds of people out of the thousands that responded to the survey had spent time to fill out responses to the survey when in reality they hadn't played the game, and they were trying to pass it off as though they had played the game when clearly they hadn't. You know, like, we're dealing with a whole other level of troll and hatred for a game that doesn't make sense when you're dealing with a ton of people claiming they dislike a game that they haven't played for no reason at all. Like, they're responding to a survey on YouTube. It doesn't make any damn sense at all. Get over here. I know I'm trying to play this like God of War and it's not working. And I think this is more generally my point. Like, the level of hatred that people held in their hearts for The Last of Us Part 2, it didn't make sense at all. Like, it confounded every logical evaluation and consideration. It was just hatred for some bizarre reason. Maybe it was that people just hated the idea that, you know, Naughty Dog has become very progressive. I think they always have been, but they are very progressive in their casting. You know, there were the leaks that said that Abby was a transgendered individual, and that obviously brought out transphobes and people who are just generally horrible to rage against the game. And I think that sort of infuriated a lot of people, even though it didn't end up being true, of course. So there were many layers to the hatred surrounding The Last of Us Part 2. I think a lot of it was that, a lot of it was just general contrarianism. But no matter how you look at it, like, The Last of Us Part 2 is a tremendous game in almost every category that you evaluate a game within. In terms of the gameplay, the graphics, the voice acting, the animation, the quality of the experience, the polished level of the AAA experience they present to you, it's all tremendous. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the game is perfect. I think there are major pacing issues in the mid-game. I think there's issues with how they try to make you relate to characters by just having one simple personality trait that they harp on constantly, like with Abby constantly bringing up that she's afraid of heights. Like, I get it. You don't need to remind me every 10 minutes. Or like I said before, the fact that they rely so heavily on the just most depressing plot point that they could possibly choose. Like, they look at a fork in the road and like, we could have something nice happen or something sad happen. And then there's another that's just the most depressing thing you can imagine. And we'll just do that. We'll just do that every time. You know, like, I get it. You want to tell a compelling, dark, gritty narrative that's realistic and grounded and sad and depressing because this world is harsh and we need to stick to it. But sometimes it's just so mind-numbingly torturous and miserable that I just want to curl up in a ball and cry. I don't actually want to continue playing. And that's where I think a lot of players ended up at the end of The Last of Us Part 2, where they were just like, I am so emotionally drained. I can't do anymore. But as we look at The Last of Us Part 2 and as we play through it and experience it again 2 years later, I'm just constantly reminded of how high quality every single little thing that they put into this game really is. Like, at the time, I remember there were articles written stating that Naughty Dog once again makes it look like no other studio is trying. And I think that's fair. Like, so much of what they did in this game is just miles ahead of what anybody else was doing at the time or even still is doing to this day. They're just on another level. And in a bizarre way, I think the main critique people have of The Last of Us Part 2, which is that they killed off Joel and then forced you to play as somebody that players hate, is actually in a weird way a twisted compliment to this franchise as a whole. Players love Joel so much that the idea of spending an extended period of time with a character who would go on to kill him for pretty atrocious acts that he certainly did commit, that idea is just so horrible that players are willing to boycott the game, to rage against it, to rant against it for hours and hours on end, almost religiously. I mean, that takes a level of care and dedication that you don't see for many titles or franchises, because really it just goes to show that players had a deep connection with Joel, and that's a testament to the writing and design of the first game, which, whether you like it or not, was made by the same guys that made this game. The same level and quality of work is present here as was present in that 2013 release. Now, for obvious reasons, I can't play through the entire game for this video. We're only jumping around to a bunch of different sections, trying to get a generalized taste for it. But what I can say is, after going back to it for this video and playing through these sections over the course of this afternoon as we've been recording, I'm reminded of just how phenomenal the game really is in terms of the quality of everything that's been put together. And while I can appreciate that quality, I think I'm almost emotionally scarred. Like, I don't want to go back and play through the whole thing again because it is such an emotional ride. I almost haven't recovered from it. Like, I need a bigger break before I go back to it. You know, I can appreciate it. I see how well everything's put together, how great everything is, but I don't think I have the energy emotionally or otherwise to go back through and experience another 20 hours of a very emotionally arduous journey. But again, I think that's a testament to the design and the efficacy of what they did here. I mean, they put together a story that's so emotionally impactful that it is so emotionally draining, people need a break, an extended break from it, because it's so potent as an artistic piece. And that in and of itself, I think, is an accomplishment. Whether you're like my friend Corey, who just doesn't like this type of thing, or you're somebody like me who can appreciate this type of thing but doesn't want to deal with it every single day, the game is still a remarkable accomplishment, I think, no matter how you look at it. And in that same vein, if you're somebody who just doesn't like this type of game, like Corey, you're totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an unfortunate reality that when games get really popular or get great reviews, every player on the planet thinks that they need to play it and they need to enjoy it because it's got great reviews. And that's just not true. It's the same thing that happened with Elden Ring. Just because some people really, really love a game doesn't mean that you have to or will. So evaluate it. And if your gut is telling you this game isn't for me, follow that gut. It's okay if you don't like something that somebody else loves. You know, it's okay that we have different tastes. There's no problem there. But you know what? If you want to hear my extended thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2, I did make a video that is 5 hours long, breaking down the game in its entirety from start to finish. Everything from the narrative to the gameplay to you name it. We discuss it in that 5-hour video. I'll have it linked below. Watch at your own risk. And if you have an idea for a game you want to see me tackle in the next video, let me know that in the comment section below. Follow all my social media, join me over on Twitch to see me play these games live and hang out generally. We have a really good time. And of course, subscribe and ring the bell because I have critiques for Kingdom Come Deliverance, Horizon Forbidden West, and Elden Ring just around the corner. But thanks for watching and supporting me. I love you all more than you could possibly know. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.